Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Melissa Feick. She is an Ascension teacher, healer, advanced intuitive, and author of A Radical Approach to the Akashic Records, Master Your Life and Raise Your Vibration, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Melissa, welcome to the program.
Hi, Johnny. How are you?
Excellent. Raising your vibe. It seems that there's an awful lot of people talking about this these days. Ascension, 3D to 5D, moving from the masculine to the feminine. What does all this mean?
This isn't new. They've been talking about this for a long time. It's just more mainstream than it ever hasn't been in the past. Now, moving from 3D to 5D or from third density to fourth density, if you're into the law of one, or raising your frequency, raising your consciousness, all of that has to do with living outside of the designed matrix that we are all in right now. And the reason I actually heard the word designed matrix, because it's been designed for us to experience this world, to be part of something that isn't usual when we are in spirit. So when we are not occupying physical form, we have a different experience and a different way that we use energy. But when we are here in the physical form, it's a whole different experience. So basically, we're going from a lower frequency, meaning where the design matrix is connected to fear, connected to difficulties or abuse, or seeing the world as something that will hurt us, and moving into the awareness that we are not our bodies, that we are more than our bodies, that we are not our minds, we are more than our minds. And this is a shift in perspective. And I believe a lot of people have difficulty understanding that shift of perspective because we've lived in this concrete world or this design matrix of there's a right and wrong. It's all this duality energy. But once we start to recognize that we are not destined to be trapped in this matrix or trapped in the duality, we start to recognize our ability to see beyond that. And then we start to recognize that, hey, what does this mean? Not just for me, but for all of us. Part of the reason why it's becoming so much more mainstream is because there's the awakening. A lot of people are saying, wait a minute, is this all there is to life? Is this it? I go to work, I get up, I go to work, I buy a car, my car breaks down, I have kids, and then I have grandkids, and then I get sick and I die. Like, that's it?
You forgot about chasing the trophy job too, but yeah, that's right. Chasing a trophy job, chasing the trophy girl or guy, getting the biggest car, the most expensive golf club membership. I live in South Florida. You mentioned, more on that later. You mentioned duality. Does that have something to do with separation, consciousness versus oneness?
Yeah, the duality is part of the design matrix. So it has been designed to let you see this dichotomy of the world. And it's designed to show you that there's a possibility of not just one thing, but many variations of that one thing. So let's take abundance. There's a lack of abundance, and then there's abundance, but there are so many variations between that. This is one of the few places that are designed to create this full-on visceral experience of right, wrong, good, bad, up, down, that duality, and also to recognize all the variances between them. There aren't a lot of other matrices designed in this way. There are other, definitely my opinion and my belief system, which could change tomorrow. I don't hold true to any belief system. But from what I understand and what I've seen interdimensionally, that there are other places like this. So this isn't the only one in zillions of galaxies, but this isn't as common because we're used to being at different frequencies. This is a unique frequency, and it gives us a unique perspective, really.
It seems to be all about the light, all about the frequencies. I was watching one of the Gaia shows called Initiation, where Matthias Di Stefano, I believe his name is, he tries to define the different dimensions, and I was lost. I just thought this is just way over my head. But what is interesting is that I've heard people talk about how thousands of years ago, there were civilizations that lived or operated in 5D. Do you agree? Ancient Egypt.
Absolutely. Yes. On the earth plane, yes. And I believe that there still is the opportunity of that connected to the earth plane. But there are so many other galaxies. When we try to limit it to just this earth plane, then we're limiting. There's so much more than that. But yeah, absolutely. I definitely believe that Lemuria was real. Plato wrote about Atlantis. That wasn't something he made up. He wasn't really one to make things up. So,
Yeah, I've actually talked to people that claim to remember lives from
yes,
Atlantis and Lemuria, which is supposed
yes.
to be older. So, fascinating idea about 5D. Apparently, the description I was given was there's no war, there's no competition. That whole minus sum game that we live in for every winner has got to be a loser does not exist. And it's a civilization that operates on a unity consciousness. That sounds wonderful, but it sounds too good to be true. But you think it's still possible.
How I see it is it's a progression. And until all of us completely integrate with the energy of 5D, we're still living in duality. There are more and more people who are opening up to that reality for themselves. But really, you can't live in that frequency and hold on to old anger at one of your parents or still feel inadequate. So I see it as an incremental thing. So we're moving from a denser energy, especially in the last 2000 years. So we've really been in a very dense frequency, but we're moving into a less dense frequency. But it doesn't happen in an instant. We're still moving through space and time. So even though we're moving into 5D, we're still living in a space and time continuum. Now, I live in Sedona, and I was told that Sedona has shifted into 5D. That's why so many people come here and they get triggered and things happen like instantaneously. Like I have to really watch my energy and my thoughts because things happen so quickly here. Manifestations happen instantly here. So it is moving into that frequency, but that doesn't mean every person who is here, lives here, or visits here is in 5D. They have the opportunity to experience 5D here, but it's not that they are living it 24/7. It's a progression. You can't go from age 5 to age 20 in an instant. We're still living in time and space and duality. Now we're moving toward instantaneous shifts, but it doesn't mean everyone's there. And you look at all the sages through the ages, and when they raise their frequency, then they live in a more 5D experience. So it's not just that the earth plane is living in 5D, we are 5D if when we raise our frequency enough to live in that space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Some people, I think, are a little bit better equipped to approach that and actually have that as a goal.
So if you look at progressionally, it started maybe 4,000 years ago, but we were in a really dense place. So it's the incremental, right? So if you think about it like a circle, and that's what Blavatsky talks about, how up here is where like Lemuria is. And that's where all the energy of the 5D, 100% fifth dimension here. And then we incrementally go down and we get denser and denser and live more and more in that energy of duality. And the very bottom of the rung has been the last couple thousand years. And now we're moving on the other end of that.
Thousands of years ago, it seems like ancient Egypt, before the pharaohs, they lived in that type of frequency. What do you suppose caused the descent? Or is it just like you said, is it just incremental? Was it not even noticeable?
Yeah, it was like, hey, let's develop this matrix and design it specifically. So we go from a very light energy into the densest energy that we can experience and then back again. So it was designed that way, in my opinion. because, like you said, I think that the ancient Egyptians, they were moving. So if we went from Atlantis and moving into the denser frequency, doesn't mean every Egyptian was at the frequency of Atlantis.
Probably not, but the reason I bring that up, fascinating story that I heard actually pretty recently was these researchers were all meeting in somewhere in Egypt, and they literally saw in a cave a hieroglyph of two men with what looked like sticks with a giant rock in the air, and their explanation was those were anti-gravitational rods that put the rocks into place. So I asked someone else about it, and he said, yeah, Johnny, you're right. What they did, it took months for them to design it, but to actually build the pyramids took a couple days. That just blew my mind. Of course, I'm going to be a little skeptical, but again, that is part and parcel of living in that type of frequency because you have different tools, literally.
Right. And you could look at it in 1,000 different ways. You could look at ETs did or this did it. But what you have to understand, and this has been proven, that the design of the pyramids was so precise. Even modern technology, we couldn't
No
recreate
way.
that. You can't recreate that. Then it had to have been something else.
Right. There's no question. Near Miami, the Coral Castle, I'm sure you've
Yes.
heard of that. There's no way he could have done that
Nope.
himself. I mean, these were like megaliths. It's ridiculous. And I was in, speaking of Egypt, the Egyptian room in the Brooklyn Museum a few years ago, and I was looking at one of the tombs, and there was basically a hole that was drilled through them. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, the guys that work for us, they couldn't do that today. And this is done 3,000 years ago. There's no way. It's not possible.
Right. And the thing is, we're trying to understand this technology in our perception of what our technology is today. Think about 100 years ago. If somebody saw our technology today of us hanging out and talking, how would they describe that or understand that?
We'd probably get locked up.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So we're trying, as humans, we love to label it, put it in a box so that we feel safer. Right? I don't want to think that there was something that happened that I can't explain. That makes us feel unsafe as humans, especially if we're really wrapped up in our ego. When we're less wrapped up in our ego, we don't really care how the pyramids were built. All I know is that something or someone has created that. And we're moving into an age where things can be created in ways that we never expected. And I've seen things appear out of nowhere. So I know it's possible.
You've seen things
Yes,
appear out of nowhere.
nowhere.
Speaking of things related to raising our vibe, ascension, and so forth, what does a Kundalini awakening have to do with that?
I look at Kundalini as two different things. People will say a Kundalini awakening. So that to them is movement of the energy within I call it the Shushumna, or the Hara line, whichever one word you want to use. But basically, it's from your crown into your root. And when you are a clear vessel of frequency or energy moving from your root into your crown and out, that is a full Kundalini experience. An awakening is that things start to move. Yes, I always think of everything as yes and no's because nothing is absolute in our world. And if you've studied enough alchemy, you understand that alchemy talks about half truths. So, yes, I would say Kundalini Awakening is there's a piece of that that has to do with ascension and moving energy. But I've known people who have had Kundalini Awakening and they still have ego stuff, or they have a full Kundalini experience and they're still upset about their car. So it doesn't mean perfection. It means you're moving energy in a different way. Things aren't as stuck. And maybe they've worked on some of their chakra systems or their higher consciousness, or how I understand it is it shifts the brain waves. And I know because I can tell when I'm in a beta brainwave or a theta brainwave. And I can also see when I'm in a gamma brainwave, I can feel it. It's a visceral experience. And that only happens when I'm in a full experience of Kundalini, like a full body explosion of Kundalini. But I don't think that's the ultimate goal. I think that people think, okay, if I get this, then I'll be awakened, or then I'll be enlightened. If I do this, then I'll be awakened. And I don't think that there is an end in our ascension.
The reason I ask so many questions about this is because every time I do ask someone, the answers or the concepts are a little bit different. The reason I asked you about Kundalini is that I had a gentleman on here pretty recently, and he said the goal of mankind is to raise Kundalini to the point where we bypass the wheel of karma, the wheel of reincarnation. I thought, oh, that's so cool. You mean I don't have to come back here and chase the trophy girl and the trophy job? That's the way I look at it. But every person that's been in that state of heightened consciousness, whether it's been a near-death experience or a life between lives, space, and so on, tells me that time doesn't really work the way we know it, and linear thinking doesn't apply. So what you're saying is that we can't think of things like, if I have an awakening, I'll be able to date supermodels or something stupid, whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because I think people assume that enlightenment or ascension, there's some end game involved. But let's look at it this way. Let's say I'm pretty enlightened as an individual, and then I die. Does that mean my enlightenment's over? My ascension's over? No. There's a next level and a next level. That's the way I look at it. Because if you're looking at it that it has to be this or there's an end result, then you're in spiritual ego. Because I don't care if I'm enlightened tomorrow. I'm just doing my thing. I have less attachment to any of those things. I don't even look at that. I don't even see that as a goal. I did many years ago, but then I realized, why am I chasing this elusive enlightening thing? Because I'm chasing it. It's like the Buddhists talk about grasping. I'm trying to get something. I want it, I want it, I want it. And when you're grasping at things, you are missing the experience.
The journey.
It's just an experience. We only consider it a journey because we think we're moving through time and space. No, it's hard because we're taught, okay, there's this ascension thing. And I learned about ascension back in 2000. And I remember them talking about it. And I thought, oh, yeah. So I chased it. And I was like, what else can I do to transform myself? And finally, I was like, this is exhausting. What is it I'm really looking for? I surrendered it all and shifted my perspective and where I am, I think.
It's a very big goal to not be able to chase things, because that's basically what we're taught. A lot of us have worked in the corporate culture at one point or the other where we hear, crush the competition. And then I had an aha moment once. I thought, we've been on the earth for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of years. That's the best we can do. Crush the competition. But I think that's really hard to escape.
When all of that frequency is living from that third chakra, all that fear, control, competition energy is all that third chakra. So that's pretty much what we're doing in the ascension, is we're moving from the third energy chakra to the heart.
And the heart is which number?
4.
Does that correspond to the fourth density, or?
Well, yeah. So if you look at density, that's from the law of one. And dimension, this is the problem when we try to qualify and quantify what's higher, what's lower. Then where are we when we do that? Hello, back in duality again. So when people tell me that they're working at the 180th dimension and they're working with these beings or those beings, to me, there's a lot of spiritual ego attached to that, which is cool. I don't even care who I'm working with. That may freak a lot of people out. But I learned long ago when people played the Ascended Master game, that's what I call it, where, well, I talk to Jesus or I talk to Cthulhu or whatever. And I thought, well, geez, why would we limit ourselves? So I just said, look, Spirit, if I'm in alignment and it's a good frequency, I'm open. I think because people get attached to these ideas or belief systems.
It's all about attachment. It is.
Yes.
Easier said than done. You can see why this can be very, very confusing. Let's talk about the records. I love the fact that I finally got you on here, because I read this book a couple of years ago. And I remember one particular quote: in the records, we create our past by allowing the old patterns of pain, belief, feelings, and karma to move outward in a spiral to come back as a new vibration. How exactly does that work, or what do we need to know about that?
Well, there are levels to the records. And again, now I just said all those things about like levels and duality. And the difference between this is that the records that are directly linked to the earth plane, those records are written in stone, let's say. So they're very clear that this record, it's a book or an energy system. You can't really change those records. So it's literally the records of our existence here in this matrix. As you move into other records, it shifts. So then the records above that hold all the information of our galaxy or our universe. And then there are other records that hold other galaxies and other universes' records.
That's amazing. But it's a lot to get your head wrapped around, right?
Well, therein lies the problem of metaphysics in general, because we try to understand it on a human experience. And the human part of us sees limitations all around us. You know, a lot of people try to understand spiritual concepts through the mind, but spiritual concepts, in my opinion, can be understood mostly through the heart or the expansion consciousness.
It reminds me of what many people have told me about near-death experiences, that unless you've actually been there, it's really hard to explain. It is impossible. But I think the best description I've got is that once you're there in that experience, especially if you have the life review, everything makes sense. All the past events, everything, even the bad stuff, you know, when your girlfriend cheated on you with your best friend and all the stuff that made no sense at all, there was a beauty to it. So I thought, okay, I guess I'm just going to have to wait till I get there.
I don't believe that. I believe that you can do it now. That's what the Ascension is.
That was my next question. You must be reading my mind, because I'm glad I highlighted this. Most people will only connect to the wise counsel after death, but you can utilize them now. You can actually reach that space through the records. I've been told different, but I'm dying to know how that works or how you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because we're moving into a higher frequency, right? We really are moving into 5D. What I understood 25 years ago is so different than what it is today. What I witnessed 15 years ago is so different than today. And it's not just me, it's everyone. We're moving into a whole new awareness. So why do we have to wait till we're dead to have a full-on experience and understanding of how we have impacted everyone around us? We don't. Because when you work on the karmic patterns that you have come here to transcend and transmute, now, then when I pass, let's say I work on about 60% of all the karmic patterns that I came here to transcend and transmute. That means when I pass, I only need to deal with 40% instead of 100%.
Right.
Because a lot of the things, like let's say I was 25 and I broke some guy's heart and I was really mean to him and I broke him,
Broke his spirit.
his psyche and his spirit and his availability to other women for 5 years. So now I die and I go back and I'm like, oh, geez, I did that. And look what I did and how I did it. You can transcend that now, because it's more of, if I'm karmically entangled in that energy and I still feel guilty, or I still am holding on to wishing that he was different because he was the love of my life. If I can transcend all that now, then that karmic pattern is rewritten and it no longer is part of my awareness, part of my Akashic records, or part of my experience.
So that's what you mean by transmuting.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. If it's possible that we can connect to this counsel, isn't that the same thing as a life review, or not quite?
It can be. It depends on where you are on your own inner awareness. So someone who's very caught up in the duality or victimization, their counsel is going to work on that with them around victimization. If I think everybody else is responsible for my life, they did this to me, they did that to me, it's their fault I'm this way, it's my mother's fault that she did that. If I'm in that place, my counsel isn't going to help me transcend certain patterns, because I still need to work on my blame of everyone else. But when I start recognizing that I am fully responsible for everything that happened in my life. And a lot of people will say, look, Melissa, I'm not responsible for my abuse when I was 5 years old. No, you're not necessarily responsible for the abuse, but you are responsible for how you are today because of that abuse.
When you said, I'm not responsible for the abuse I was when I was, let's say, 5 years old, right? Really horrible stuff. But that person might have agreed to that in a soul contract. Her guides or the counsel might have said, great, you need to work on this, pick a body, pick a person, and then, go back.
Yeah, so basically what happens is we choose the family we're going to incarnate with because they will help us work through our own karmic patterns. I don't see karma as I killed you. Now we have to come back and we have to have this lifetime where you are abusive to me for my whole life. I don't believe that's how we work. I think it's more complex than that. I think we say, okay, you know what? I want to understand how to transcend this energy of abuse. So I need to incarnate in a family that's going to be pretty abusive so that I recognize that there's this victim pattern, but I'm also going to recognize that I can empower myself through this. So what happens is when we're abused, that energy gets imprinted in our cellular memory. That trauma, it gets infused in our DNA. It gets infused in our genetic patterns. We pass it down from generation to generation to generation. What we can do is we can look in the Akashic records, and I work in the Akashic records in the quantum field. Okay, so it's a different record. It's not better or worse, it's just different. It's not a hierarchy because we don't want to even go into hierarchies because then your spiritual ego gets involved. But what the great thing about the Akashic records in the quantum field is that so I have this imprinted trauma and it sits in my energy field and it's connected to emotional victimization, feeling unworthy, unlovable. It's connected to my patterns from my mother. It's connected to my past lives. Okay, so this is entangled. It's entangled in many ways, many, many, many ways. When I go into the Akashic records on the quantum field, I recognize my part, meaning I have chosen victimization as a way to look at my life. So now, every relationship I have, I play victim. I use my victim to manipulate people. I use my victim to go, oh, look, oh, I'm poor me. I use it passive aggressively, saying, oh, if you loved me, you would help me. That is where we are responsible. But the problem is, and the situation is, this all sits under the radar of our subconscious.
Very much so.
Right, absolutely. So most people, when I'm working with them, they're like, I don't get this. How can I associate love with abuse? Well, yeah, it makes sense because you are raised in an abusive environment and with people who are supposed to love you. So you're like, love must be that I get abused.
Yeah, that can be very, very confusing. It sounds like it almost is like a form of therapy. I would say like advanced therapy because it seems like issues that can be approached through working in the records, like past life regression, people can actually access or at least uncover what the problem is, whereas traditional therapy, they might just run into a wall.
Right. And you have to think about past lives. So the reason when I got downloaded this book, A Radical Approach to Akashic Records, when I was downloaded with it, what they told me was that we are moving past one lifetime, one lifetime, one lifetime. We are moving past that into the pattern. And when we work in the pattern, in the larger patterns of abuse, victimization, abandonment, betrayal, when we work in those larger patterns, we can transcend 100 lifetimes.
Oh my.
Instead of going lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So it's a shift in perspective. It's a shift in energy, which is really what we want to accelerate. Well, we are accelerating our frequency. And if we still hold on to lower patterns, we're going to have trouble doing that. Now, yes, it is kind of like a therapy 100%. When I'm working with people, I realize that it's the depth that most people don't understand that I can go to that a lot of people don't usually get to because they're surface cleaning. And there's nothing wrong with that. because not everybody can go to the depth and look at themselves that honestly. Because when you go into the Akashic Records on the quantum field, there's a certain amount of holy moly going on because you're like, wow, I can't believe this pattern and how much I was involved and responsible for my pattern, where it wasn't my mother. I've been blaming my mother for 40 years, but it wasn't my mother. It was me. I chose to hold on to this pattern. It's not just that she abused me, but how I've used it.
How you allowed it, maybe?
Yeah, well, not how you allowed it, how it came out through our subconscious. I don't believe in blame. You can't blame someone for who they are. You can't blame someone for what their experiences were. But when you start taking responsibility, you're empowered and you stop blaming other people or yourself. That blame game is over. And you're like, wow, I'm responsible for how I treat people. Even though I'm afraid to be abused, and maybe I attract abuse because I want it, I can't blame my abuser because for some reason I chose this. And it's not a blame, but wow, just because I chose it, I can also transcend it. And therein lies their power. And it's not manipulation or control power, it's heart power, love power, connection power. That's totally different than manipulation and masculine. It's a difference between masculine, not man, masculine power and feminine power.
Speaking of which, does the divine feminine or the divine masculine have anything to do about what we're talking about today, or is that like a different subject altogether?
Well, that's the duality of the matrix that we live under, and it's part of the laws. So it's the duality of understanding and the merging of the two when we no longer live in the duality of masculine, feminine energies, then we've transcended that. But it's still kind of in that matrix. So we're still living under the guise of that frequency.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that you were downloaded. Can you tell us about that?
For me and for many people, they say something similar. It was a full, and I get these downloads often. It becomes a full visceral experience. I understand it. I know it. I see it. I feel it. It is like a full download. When I got the download of the book, I saw immediately how everything was connected, how this is on the quantum field and how the Akashic Records work and what the levels were. But I also did need to unpack some of it. So think of it like a zip file, and then you have to unzip it.
Yeah, pretty incredible stuff. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today. How can our listeners find you online?
I'm very simple to find. It's Melissa Feick, F as in Frank, EICK.com.
Excellent. I will put that in the notes. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. If you liked it, you can also leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.